sure there's exceptions for people who've been raped and those kind of things, and they want to make sure, and that's important. But also, I think a lot of people can relate to, I was, whatever reasons people have, a lot of people can relate to them, and honestly, the silencing of those voices really has been deliberate in terms of the folks who are opposed to abortion, because they know, that there's just a lot of common experiences there, and when people start sharing those common experiences, that's what creates empathy and compassion, and people have a lot more understanding. So it's easier, I think, for, if there's nobody talking about it, you fill that void in with your own thoughts and narratives. And so, so when we have that silence, then people will sort of believe, things that maybe aren't necessarily true about, things like, well, this person has an abortion. They just, for whatever reason, they disparage that. And so when there's nobody else to speak against that, it then becomes sort of a truism, a lie repeated 100 times becomes the truth or something like that, So you just have to, I think, and you do see, particularly younger people are more open to sharing their experiences with abortion and miscarriage and accessing contraception. You've seen a younger generation that's more comfortable doing that, and I think that is how you're starting to see sort of people opening up, and also we are at this moment too where people are starting to realize, hey, actually this right that we had taken for granted, it might not be there. And so now you're starting to see people also feel like they have to stand up and say, actually I do support abortion access, whatever my personal feelings on it, I still support it, and sharing their own stories. And I think that's how you start to just grow that compassion and grow those common experiences that people then can start to feel empathy for each other and start to be more understanding.
Yeah, definitely. And what were some of the things that got you yourself involved in this kind of activism role and just being involved in NARAL? So just out of curiosity, because we love to hear from our activist community and people that are doing this kind of frontline work. So I was just wondering what brought you into this fight?
Well, I will say, in North Carolina, I've been in North Carolina about 20 years now, and I had started doing, a long time ago, I had started doing some volunteer work with a local agency that provides support to victims of domestic and sexual violence. And I was, doing, I was part of the support groups, and I was working with the kids. And then I don't know, I just started, as I learned more, because you go through a pretty intense training to be doing this kind of volunteer work. And so I started to think a lot more about how, public policy impacts the experience of people experience this type of violence. And then I think I started to learn more about how things are, kind of intersecting. People are staying in the shelter, and one of the reasons they may go back to their abuser is because they actually just can't find a place to live that they can afford, or their abuser has their health insurance, and so I was starting to understand the policy decisions that we make actually do have an impact on people's lives. And so then I started to get involved in policy advocacy around issues impacting women, either directly and or uniquely. And so I spent a number of years with a coalition called North Carolina Women United, which is a coalition of about 25 organizations that takes a gender lens to state policy. And NARAL Pro-Choice North Carolina is one of those member organizations. And then in 2016, I was approached about applying to be the ED at NARAL Pro-Choice North Carolina. And so that's how then I just took that interest I had been doing, started with volunteering and then sort of looking into how policy impacts people, and then doing this work at NARAL. And one of the things that we do at NARAL Pro-Choice North Carolina is look at policy and make sure that, trying to put forward good, positive policies that actually will be beneficial to people across North Carolina, particularly in achieving reproductive freedom.
Yeah, definitely. And how important do you think it's going to be in terms of some of the court cases? Because like I said, I believe Roe versus Wade may be coming back up and everything, and definitely we have a fairly conservative court, and I think that there's probably some people that are even thinking about retirement that we're hoping that they stay in office so that we have at least a shot at maintaining these kind of progressive laws and everything. But as you're having these conversations, how important is that conversation that you're having for people to, one, look at the candidates? There's a whole host of them in the Democratic Party, and also the whole Supreme Court makeup and layout.
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely. I mean, we've been watching the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court, they made the decision in 1973 to legalize abortion up to what they call viability, and they said that, that's something that the doctor and the patient needs to figure out. So they legalized, they legalized abortion in all 50 states, and they did that in part in response to what they saw was going on. Like, it didn't happen in a vacuum. They knew that people were accessing abortion even though it was not legal, and people were putting themselves at risk to do so. They had that decision in 1973. And now, there have been, not a whole lot of decisions, Supreme Court decisions necessarily on abortion access. They haven't always been decisions that have advanced reproductive freedom. They had the one in 2016, the whole women's health case, that did say that you could not arbitrarily make restrictions on abortion access that were purely political and had nothing to do with women's health or making the procedure safer. So that was a good decision. But we do worry about with this what we see as a conservative anti-abortion majority, 5-4 majority on the Supreme Court. We know that there are a lot of states who are, like in Georgia and Missouri and Alabama, North Dakota, Iowa, they are passing laws that are clearly unconstitutional when it comes to abortion access. They are passing laws that say that abortion is essentially banned in the state, or it's banned at 6 weeks. And these they know are unconstitutional because they do not meet the standard that was set in Roe v. Wade. But what they're doing is wanting to get that case to the Supreme Court that then challenges the standard set in Roe v. Wade, with their hope is that they will either further really gut Roe v. Wade, which certainly has not entirely lived up to its promise about making sure people can access abortion care. But, it's still very important, and we're worried that it'll be either further gutted with these cases that might come up to it, or just overturned completely. And I can't read the tea leaves about what the Supreme Court is going to do. I think that's very difficult, but we definitely are concerned. There's certainly, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh were put on the Supreme Court to fulfill the promise that the president made that he was going to overturn Roe v. Wade. So we don't expect there to suddenly be some kind of change of heart where maybe they feel really moved by precedent. We think if something gets to the Supreme Court, potentially it's going to be a decision that's going to further erode access to safe and legal abortion.
Yep. Now, I think it was either last year or the year before, last month or the month coming up, there was a big rally supporting Women's Equality Day. Is there going to be something similar in 2019? Because I know that in 2017, as I was looking at the NC Policy Watch page, there was a big rally to commemorate Women's Equality Day, and we know that there needs to be a lot of things around better pay and things of that nature, because I think even the soccer team kind of had put that into the forefront with their victory, and folks realizing the vast contrast between what those soccer players are playing versus the male soccer players.
And it's definitely great to see, amidst the joy of the victory of the women's soccer team, then, them also bringing up, hey, this is inequity. Even us at the top of our game are still experiencing this. And so I think it helps bring in that larger conversation about how sort of the gender discrimination that does exist in equal pay. Now, I think you're talking about the Women's Equality Day events that were typically in August, because that is, it commemorates the ratification of the 19th Amendment that gave that said you couldn't discriminate for voting rights based on gender. And so that's something that we had worked with folks primarily in Durham on, and I'm not sure what we'll be doing this year. I actually am not sure. I know that we need to mark the day, and there's certainly been a lot that has been going on in general. In May, this past May, after there was the Alabama ban that essentially banned abortion, after that law passed, the idea was to have, there was just this grassroots uprising in all 50 states and Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia for people to come together to come out and show publicly that they support abortion access. And we had a huge one in Raleigh. It was about 300-some people. And we had planned it in a couple of days. And we actually had them, I think, in 8 other cities across North Carolina. People came out. And you saw that in all 50 states. And so you're seeing, like, people coming out and rallying. And it is important to do that, to have that show, to give that validation to folks that, yeah, people feel like I do. They're out here just like I am. So I'm not sure yet what we are doing this August in Durham, but I will certainly let you know when we have something set up.
Yeah, please do keep me informed on that, and we'll definitely post it and let folks know when there is a concrete event and everything. But I do know that is a big celebration that is need to be had on a regular basis. Now, one of the conversations that we've had on this show, because we've had Javiera on and we've had Jillian and we've had some other very strong leaders out of our community that have been on the show in the past, is this whole notion, and of course it's coming up in the presidential candidacy now of Elizabeth Warren, Camilla, and others, that both the U.S. has never had a woman president, and there's like this belief that the time is not now. And I was just wondering, as a progressive and somebody that is involved in politics, what your answer is when you hear these kind of conversations that people are trying to, like, downplay their even chance of being elected because of their gender.
Well, I mean, one of the things I will say is, you know, of course we have the way our system's set up. You have the popular vote and the electoral college vote. And, you know, so one thing you could point to is that, like, a woman did win the popular vote in 2016 to be president. So I think there is, yeah, like, I think people are ready for that. And it's just, I'm not sure what to say when people say that people aren't ready. Like, I acknowledge that we live in a very sexist society. We live in a very racist society. But that doesn't mean that you can't elect a woman to be president. And I think that you've got a lot of, like, I think it's wonderful that we see, you know, of course there's so many people running for the Democratic nomination, but to see, like, it just looks, when you look on the stages and when you have all these people, like, you do see a lot more representation of what America looks like. And I think that that's ideally what we want to be. And, you know, women make up half the population, and we're still not well represented either in Congress. Like, now it's more than ever, but it's still, I think, maybe over a quarter of Congress are people who identify as women. And in the General Assembly in North Carolina, it's like just under 25%, I think. I think it's gone down over the last couple of years, actually. And so what you see when you don't have that kind of representation, like, it's not that men can't be doing great policies that are helpful to women, but, like, when you have women there who are experiencing these things, like, you just start to, like, people will just, I think you'll be addressing issues that maybe don't necessarily get the attention that they should when you have people who are not really dealing with them directly. Like, I feel like one of the issues why we don't have childcare, like equitable, quality, affordable child care for everyone, is because we don't have a lot of women in our lawmaking bodies. Like, just because, you know, for a lot of men, not that they aren't taking care of their children, but, like, women are still the primary caretakers of children, and so they're going to be thinking of those things because that is something that is a reality in their lives. Like, for them to show up at meetings, they have to have some child care, maybe, if they have young kids. And that's just not something that everyone deals with, so then it gets pushed to sort of, like, it's not as important. So I think having that kind of representation, and, you know, when people say, like, we're not ready, you know, I don't know, why not? Like, what makes people think we're not ready? Just because, like, we are, there's a lot of sexism, there's a lot of misogyny. That doesn't mean that we still can't elect a woman for president, and it's great to see so many great candidates.
Yeah, definitely. And you just brought it up, and I mentioned it earlier as well. Why in 2019 do you think that sexism is so rampant? I mean, I know that it just seems like we should have advanced way past this by this century and everything else. And I know that it's been going on, and some people even argue that there's quite a bit of sexism in ancient books, whether that's the Bible, the Quran, or whatever. But it just seems that we should have moved a lot beyond this by now. So as an activist, what are your views on that? Because it just seems to me we should have gotten past this by now. Well,
I mean, I think, like, it's the status quo, and it has been for a long time, just like, yeah, and so, I think, like, it's just harder to move